let's start, and then I'm sure they will start.
Are you gonna like give a little pep talk or anything?
No.
Yeah, starting this off. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Oh, there's off.
I was feeling real comfortable. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Who wants to talk about vaginas? I do. Did I wake you up yet? Did you decide to turn off your computers? Alright. Can we have y'all sit on this side just so we can make eye contact with subset of the room? Unless you think restrooms not gonna fill up, right? Yeah, come on over here. Look at this little powwow. Campfire or something. They can see me up there. Hello, online. Hello. Where's the? There, yeah. Hey. Well, thank you all so much for attending this panel today. Really excited to talk to you about innovations in women's health and wellness. You hopefully today will walk away with the realization that sex-based healthcare is wildly underserved. And if you are a feminist or any kind of human rights activist, you are going to leave here today being like, unacceptable. Like, what? Women's healthcare is so far back in history, and we're not even like here today present with current 2020 solutions. So I'm excited for us to get excited and inspired for women's health innovation. A little bit about myself, and then I'd love our panelists to introduce themselves. You have a really great lineup here. Linda did a great job of picking some amazing local folks. So my name is Dr. Brittany Barretto. I have a PhD in genetics. I'm a serial entrepreneur and venture capitalist. I'm best known for my venture-backed dating app. That was a DNA-based dating app. So I matched singles based on a cheek swab that looked at attraction via pheromones. I was a venture capitalist, senior venture associate at the most active fund in Texas. I did a pandemic move, 2020, moved here to Raleigh, and started a company called Femtech Focus. So Femtech Focus is a nonprofit, and we raise awareness for the inequalities in sex-based healthcare. And today we're gonna make sure you all know the difference between sex and gender. And once you know that definition, you'll realize that nobody is correctly addressing those terms whatsoever. So we raise awareness, and we also support founders in the women's health innovation industry. We have a podcast. If you like podcasts, definitely check it out. Femtech Focus. We have over 50,000 listeners in over 100 countries. Interviewed over 160 experts in women's health. And I've also co-founded a venture fund, Coyote Ventures. We invest in early stage women's health startups. So I'm so excited to moderate this panel, and I would love our guests to introduce themselves and tell us, you know, you have such impressive backgrounds. What are the highlights that are pertinent for this panel today?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Shaprov. I'm currently Chief of Staff to the CEO of LabCorp, based here in North Carolina. I've been at LabCorp since 2018, primarily focused on digital health and the patient journey. So we've got some good things to talk about today. Before that, I spent my career as a graphic designer in the drug development space and made the transition into the business world when I went to get my MBA. I'm actually a UNC undergrad and a Duke grad student, still a Tar Heel. I was there Saturday night cheering them on to victory, which was great. I also own a local business in Apex called Bottle Theory. It's a beer and wine retail shop. And this morning we were voted best new business in Wade County, best neighborhood bar, best bottle shop, and best place for a friend's night out. So,
Oh yeah, fantastic. I'm Samantha Meltzer-Brody. I'm the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at UNC School of Medicine. I'm a psychiatrist and physician scientist. My research has been focused on women's health and focused on issues around sex-based disparities, in particular, the lack of attention paid to women across the reproductive life cycle and postpartum depression. Work to develop and an app which has been the largest genetic study of postpartum depression in the world, now called Mom Genes Fights PPD. And because of the pandemic and leading a large academic department of psychiatry, we are now firmly in the digital health space with virtual care. And so we have doubled the number of visits because of virtual care, and the UNC healthcare system is now growing an entire sort of virtual care, if you will, sort of sub-business of which behavioral health is very much part of it. So it's been a remarkable transformation, and I think that the digital health space, and particularly for women's health, is an amazing place to be watching now.
So excited for this panel. Let us all get on the same page here, because a lot of people think femtech means female founder. Although 85% of our founders are female, it is not specific to female founders. We are talking about creating solutions that improve the health and wellness of women, girls, and females. So you may notice the difference in gender and sex there. So you may identify as a man, but still have a vagina that needs care. So that's why we say female, women, and girls. A quick definition here: gender is a societal construct, and most often is women and man. Obviously not all are women and man. There's lots of other identities, but in general. And then sex is biological. It's what you're born, female or male. I want you all to go out into the world and see how often you are asked when you sign up at your gym, when you buy an airline ticket, when you register for an event on Eventbrite, how often it asks you for your sex and then provides you with man or woman, or asks you for your gender and then says female and male. I want us all to do a favor, like I do, which I tweet personally, and I tag that company and say, you don't know the difference, that's really important. So I invite you all to do the same. So femtech is solutions for women's health and wellness, including conditions that solely, disproportionately, or differently affect women. So solely is menstruation, menopause, maternal health, things that are really kind of require a uterus. And then there are things that disproportionately or differently affect women. For example, men have more heart attacks, but women die more often from heart attacks because the signs of a heart attack are based on the male symptoms. Women's heart attacks are often fatigue and jaw pain and maybe a headache, not the left arm thing that we usually see in the movies where they go, oh, my chest hurts, my arm is numb. That's for men. So we also address things like autoimmune disease. 90% of autoimmune patients are women, and we don't know why. Women are twice as likely to get Alzheimer's. So these are the things we're talking about here. The market is a $1.1 trillion market. So if anyone says that it's niche, you can do a Will Smith on them, all right? Because it is not niche, it's over $1 trillion. I do not condone violence, I'm just joking. There are only 6 femtech funds in the world, 6, of which 5 have been established in the last 2 years. That is insane. And the product types range from med device, diagnostics, therapeutics, but it includes also consumer product goods. Tampons are a medical device, right? Digital health, lots of different types of product types. So anything that's addressing a solution for women's health. That's just a little bit of like laying the groundwork. We're all on board with what women's health is, what we're talking about here today. Awesome. And we all know sex and gender. Perfect. Samantha, let's start with you. Have you seen attention to female-specific healthcare evolve over the last 5 years that you've been working in it? And then specifically, how did the pandemic affect women's health?
So the first question, yes, absolutely. And in many ways, it's just taken off. The pandemic has, I think, been cruel to everyone. It's been particularly cruel to women. It's been particularly cruel to mothers. The hit on women in the workforce, the hit on professionals, there's a lot on women in science, but across all industries trying to manage small kids at home, which are differentially taken care of by women who still provide the vast majority of caretaking roles, has been just, a disaster over the course of the pandemic. When we look at rates of eating disorders, depression, postpartum depression, much higher in women incredibly impacted. And we see in our youth and college-age kids that it's often young women that are having really horrible impact from social media and increased rates of suicide. The mitigating factor that gives me hope is that there's also seems to be a big movement interested in trying to address this. So there's a lot of interest in women's mental health, in looking at the adolescent health crisis, in appreciating the impact of gender and the fact that we haven't taken these things seriously, and what we're going to do moving forward. But I'm also very encouraged by the younger generation really, seizing the day and saying it's not okay for these things to be neglected anymore, and that we are going to have female focused and companies, products, digital health, whatever it is that's going to really change the face of things. I will tell you this, that in the maternal mental health space, virtual care has been a godsend. So it was always hard to get to a doctor and find a mental health provider that could be 3 hours away from where you live and then haul your postpartum self and a new baby to visits. And now that you can do all of that from your couch, no-show rates have plummeted. People are able to access care conveniently. So why on earth would we ever want to go back to where we were before? So I think we're seeing this amazing transformation. Remarkably, I would add the payers only started paying for virtual care because of the pandemic. And so even though they have refused to commit to permanent coverage of behavioral health care, I think most people, and when I've talked to payers, will say that will be a genie that will be almost impossible to get back in the box.
Good. Keep that genie out there.
Keep it out there.
Kelly, how have you seen on more of the corporate side, the change in attitude or perspective on women's health?
Yeah, so at LabCorp, I would say our focus on women's health has really been correlated to our focus on women in leadership in business. So if you look back 5 years ago, our women's health business was run by a man. It didn't make any sense. We got a new CEO, my boss, Adam Schechter, in November of 2019, and he has made incredible strides in adding women in leadership. To his executive management team, he's added 3 women, including 1 woman of color, to the board of directors, 2 women, 2 people of color. And so we've started to see the shift at that board level, at the executive level, and we're having conversations about what women's health really means. So I'll give you one example. During the pandemic, we launched Pixel by LabCorp. It was the first at-home collection kit for COVID-19. And initially it was only available for adults 18 and up. In that executive committee, 2 women EVPs were very vocal about saying, no, this needs to be more broadly available. This should be available for kids. To your point, Samantha, we had mothers working at home trying to balance childcare, elder care, house cleaning, work, all of the things. And the idea of taking a small kid to the doctor to get a nasal swab and then get everybody loaded in the car, come back, it was just an exceptional burden where Pixel allowed you to order a test, have it FedExed to your doorstep, to swab your nose, put it back in the FedEx box, drop it off, and get results. And so the women at LabCorp were really vocal about thinking about women's health as how do our patients need healthcare and how can we better serve them? We know that women make 80% of healthcare decisions. 80%. So it's for their entire families. So now we're starting to think about women's health more than just pregnancy testing and prenatal testing. We're thinking about the patient and what that women's health experience is.
I think you both brought up a really great point, which is when we have more women at the table, we think about, providing menstrual products for when there's a catastrophe, whereas society has created women's bodies and functions to be so taboo that we don't talk about it. And so oftentimes men are not necessarily to blame because they've just never heard about all these problems that we're experiencing because society tells us not to talk about it, right? But once we have more women in leadership roles, we're seeing this greater attention to women's health. And I think that really people may wonder, well, women in health have been around for a while. Why are we now just talking about it? And I think that is what we're seeing. More women in STEM creating solutions, more women in leadership saying, this is important. This is absolutely a priority. Why are we not doing that, right? Samantha, what is digital health? You were alluding to, telehealth and stuff. So give us kind of a definition of what is digital health.
It's such a great question because I don't think there's one completely agreed upon definition, but it's accessing health using digital software technology of some kind. So I guess it is often just not traditionally in the room one-on-one with someone. So it can be virtual care on Zoom. We are all more than familiar with that. It can be app-based, it can be web-based, but it really is just different ways of getting care. And in the behavioral health space, we know that most mental health professionals live in urban areas, which means that if you don't live in an urban area, you are not going to easily be able to access behavioral health care. North Carolina, for example, is second only to Texas in the country with having the largest population of people living in rural areas, which means in the Triangle or in Charlotte, you can find a mental health professional. Although, with the mental health crisis, the pandemic, you won't be able to get an appointment. But otherwise, you're living in a place where you literally will not be able to find anyone. The magic of virtual care or digital health is that you can access care from wherever you are. And it's been remarkable for decreasing stigma. You don't have to go into an office that says mental health, which a lot of people find horrifying. You can, rather than taking a complete day off or a half day off to go to an appointment, you can sit in your truck at lunch and have your appointment. And so people don't have to deal with things around having a car and transportation and childcare or taking time off from work or school. So it's been a huge success, which is why I think that digital health, is revolutionary. And certainly it's not going to work in surgery in the same way, because it's hard to do digital health and have surgical procedures be particularly effective. But in the behavioral health space, I think it really has decreased so many of the barriers to care. And so I only see it continuing to flourish, which is why there's whatever the number is, some $1 billion investment in digital mental health technologies. And it's expected only some small number will actually remain moving forward. But there's been this massive sort of, if you will, race to see which of these is going to take off.
And a few additional points that I've realized in my own work is that SMS-based telehealth can actually be saving a woman's life if she can't talk out loud about it. There's a company called Hey Jane that they mail you your abortion pills. And there's many women or transgender folks that message the organization via text and they don't have to say out loud what they're looking for. And I was gonna say, also finding providers that are culturally sensitive to you. If you're of a specific religion or culture or race, and you wanna find a therapist or a physician that looks like you, understands you, if you're not limited to a 20-mile radius, you have a much more chance of finding that right person. How has digital health evolved at LabCorp?
Yeah, it's been a journey. So I think about LabCorp's digital health in 3 buckets. So the first is where we're investing in capabilities that digitize our core business. The second is ways that we are transforming our business or investing in adjacent areas. And the third is through external partnerships, or often it's acquisitions. And so examples of that first bucket, where we're investing in digital solutions that support our core business, those are things we've been doing for years. And that could be the way we schedule appointments online, the way we deliver results to patients and to providers. And that became really important during the pandemic, where we already had this solution available, but we were able to tell people about a program called Wait Where You're Comfortable. And essentially, you schedule an appointment online, drive to your local LabCorp patient service center, check in on your phone, and get an SMS text message when it's your turn to get your blood drawn. So we launched this, we launched it years ago, but we renamed the program early in March of 2020, before things really shut down, but just when people were starting to get a little worried about going to a crowded waiting room. And so it was really important that we had built that capability over time. That was something everyone could get behind. The second bucket is where I spent most of my time and energy, and that's in imagining what diagnostics and what healthcare could look like in the future. So I led the Pixel by LabCorp team in 2018 through 2019. And we created a platform. It was LabCorp's first consumer-initiated diagnostic platform. So basically, you as a consumer can go on, can order your own lab test. You know what you need, you know what answers you're looking for. You schedule an appointment, get your blood drawn, and then get your results in your app. That was incredibly challenging to navigate in a big corporate function because we have so many different stakeholders to consider. So we've got our current customers, our physicians. Our physicians gonna like having a patient come in and say, I ordered my own lab result and here's what it says. Think about like the pushback against WebMD or Dr. Google. So we had to navigate how do we make this something that fits within LabCorp's ecosystem. There were all sorts of legal and reimbursement considerations. If we're offering lab tests at an affordable price for a consumer, it can't be lower than our Medicare rate. It can't be lower than what we've contracted with managed care. So we had to think through, okay, how do we keep everybody happy? How do we develop a solution that works for patients, expands access, but also we can get it through all of these other stakeholders. Also, regulatory. What is the FDA going to say about a product like Pixel, which is now called LabCorp On Demand, but how does that affect our relationship and our credibility as a brand? And then that third bucket is partnerships and acquisitions. And that is really helpful when that second building internally gets to be too difficult. So we've acquired things like a company called Snap IoT, and they work in the hybrid and virtual clinical trial space. And so we acquire that capability. It's proven. They have track record. Our customers, our payers, our pharma and biotech clients are more comfortable with it already. And we've got a venture fund at LabCorp called the LabCorp Venture Fund. And through that, we're investing in lots of early companies that we believe could potentially change the landscape. And so we give them capital, we give them access to our experts in reimbursement, in regulatory affairs, and then we get to kind of nurture them and help them grow outside of LabCorp until the point where it makes sense to integrate.
Mm-hmm. Y'all both brought up a bunch of really interesting things that are struggles for digital health, but they're also struggles for women's health, like billing codes. We have a huge billing code issue for women's health. We're still calling endometriosis and other diseases as hysteria in the early 1990s. Today, we do have a billing code for endometriosis, which affects 1 in 10 women, but it's still a specialty billing code, which most insurances won't cover. So we have, as I mentor founders, one of their biggest issues is there's no billing code. And then they have to decide, do we go direct to consumer or do we go down the FDA route and try to get a billing code created? We need a lobby for it. We need to ask Congress and all this business, right? But if we go direct to consumer, our product, let's say at-home maternal fetal monitoring, there's now these new devices where pregnant women can stay at home, connect virtually with their physician, have this device on their belly, have their heart rate being monitored, all these things. You know how much that device costs though, right? Like $5,000. And if insurance isn't covering it, what women are getting it? Typically affluent white women. And then all the branding of that company targets their customer. And then all of a sudden we're innovating for affluent white women's health. And the maternal mortality rate, if you did not know this, by the way, is on the rise. And the United States has the highest maternal mortality rate, meaning you die during childbirth or within 1 year afterwards, of any developed country in the world. We have a serious issue. Women of color die 3 times more often than white women. And it is not because they're sicker or something. It's literally racism in the healthcare system. And so, it's really inspiring to see digital health because, again, we can find that physician that's the best fit for us. We can do it from home. Women who are working part-time or hourly basis, can't have childcare, they're finally getting access to the healthcare that they need. But not all fair digital health solutions are true therapeutics. Some of them are like gadgets, some of them are like just track your period, but what are you gonna do with it, right? But some digital health apps are literally FDA regulated as a digital therapeutic. So can you, Samantha, tell us a little bit about the difference between a digital app gizmo and like a digital therapeutic?
Well, there are very few things that are really digital therapeutics that are FDA approved right now in the digital health space. So we know that you can use a virtual care platform to deliver what would be considered, licensed, accredited care of whether medical care of some kind, behavioral health care of some kind, where you're working with a licensed health professional that can be delivered digitally. And there's a number of telepsychiatry and other companies that have sprung up. It's raised all kinds of interesting issues about where the patient is and where the provider is and who's licensed where and where they're sitting. So right now in North Carolina, if I'm taking care of someone and they, a college kid or a graduate student goes to school in Boston, right now, according to the payer laws, you're not allowed to take care of the person because they're in Boston, which is sort of absurd.
Once I was on vacation and I was like, oh, I need a refill and pulled on my digital health app. K-Health is what I use. And they were like, where are you located right now? And I was like, oh, I'm in vacation in New Hampshire. And they were like, we can't treat you. You have to, find a new physician. And I was like, what the hell? I don't even know where you are.
It's so absurd. I mean, it's beyond absurd. The short answer would be just don't say where you were, but just say where you. But
I learned my lesson.
Yes, exactly. But then, but one of the things is we know there's evidence-based therapies that have data. And as a physician, that's really important. So whenever you're using any kind of digital health app, there are things that are marketed, but are actually, there's no evidence base, and they're certainly not FDA approved, but there can be someone with fabulous marketing. So you really want to make sure you're doing something that's evidence-based and actually has data around it.
How would you suggest they find out if it's validated? How would a common person know?
Yeah, I think you have to do your research, because you can have really jazzy looking apps. And we can always think of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes and where that went, speaking of something without any kind of data. So you want to actually look for anything that's going to be FDA approved, that there are published manuscripts that are peer reviewed by the scientific community. I mean, LabCorp is not going to run a test without it being validated, okay, for example. But Elizabeth Holmes got Theranos testing products into Walgreens, and it was worth, a bunch of bunk, which is a terrifying sort of moment for all of this. So I think you absolutely have to look and see what the data is, read deeply, certainly spend some time on Google to see what's the evidence that led to this. And if there's not any, then you should stay far away.
I usually find that on their websites, and I interview a lot of these founders of these companies. On their websites, they're usually very proud of their publications, and they have the citations right there. They're like, read it. Like, they're usually really proud. Whereas the companies that haven't done the testing, it's more about like, this is like
smoke and mirrors.
You'll feel better. It's a lot more about like the sales pitch rather than like, we're scientists. Some great examples of this is Big Health, BIG Health. They're a mental health app for anxiety and insomnia. They do a lot of clinical research. Another one is Lin Health, L-I-N, and they do chronic conditions and chronic pain. And they've done a lot of sites. So look for those citations, those peer review articles that on their website. So yeah. FDA, you mentioned that the big FDA.
Oh, yeah.
Do they acknowledge digital therapeutics? Is it therapeutic? Like, do they have a say on it? Do they have a process? Tell us about that.
So they do. The FDA has been regulating digital health since 2005, but it's still very much a work in progress. Only in 2020 did the FDA create the Digital Health Center of Excellence.
Oh,
Yeah, 2020.
While their hair was on fire. Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So it kind of combines all of that digital health expertise from across the FDA, because it's kind of popping up here and there. I mentioned Snap IoT earlier. Snap IoT helps us run clinical trials and collect data for our pharma biotech customers. If you didn't know, LabCorp also has a drug development arm. So something like Snap IoT is regulated not by the FDA, but how the data from the trial is used to get that drug approved. So obviously that's something that our clients care a lot about. We would not want the FDA to come back and say, your data looks great, but we don't believe in that device that you use to collect it all. So we've got to be really able to work hand in hand with the FDA up front on that drug development side. But then this new Digital Health Center of Excellence is actually in the medical device arm of the FDA. And so like most medical device regulation, the FDA thinks about it in terms of the risk to the patient. So earlier you mentioned tampons are considered medical devices. Band-Aids are medical devices, but so are stents that are left in the body for years and years and years, or a new knee or a new hip. So when the FDA looks at those devices, they look at, is it safe? Is it effective? Does it do what it says it's going to do? And they look at all of the data from the trials. Something like a Band-Aid or a tampon doesn't need the same level of rigor as a stent or some sort of valve that they're putting in the body and leaving. And so that's what we've seen, kind of the evolution in digital health regulation. Something like LabCorp On Demand, former Pixel, all of those tests are run on the same exact platforms that a doctor would send your test to. So it's still LabCorp. It's the exact same test. There's no extra clinical validation needed. But we look at how the results are being interpreted and how they're being presented to the patients. Where something like Ovia Health, which we acquired through our venture fund, and we can talk about in a second, there's a piece in the Ovia fertility app that allows you to track your menstrual cycle and fertility. So it relies on a number of user inputs, and the question becomes then, is this a form of birth control? Are women or users, females, using this app to make decisions about their health? And so what is that level of risk, and how involved does the FDA need to get? So we're still figuring it out. LabCorp takes our relationship with the FDA very seriously. So it's a partnership, and we're having conversations. We're all learning together as we go.
It kind of reminds me of 23andMe when it was like, are we allowed to diagnose people and say you have a breast cancer gene, you know, or are we only allowed to say, here's your data, go see a physician? And where is that line between providing a diagnosis and providing lab results and then a go see your physician, you know?
Fun fact, LabCorp was the back end lab for 23andMe. So the lab test itself was the same level of quality, but that genetic information and what the patient could do with it was definitely uncharted territory.
Uncharted territory. I think a lot of this is just like literally uncharted territory.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about some digital health solutions in the women's health space. Samantha, can you provide us some examples?
Yes, there's a couple examples, and I made sure I had a list, so I would be able to not forget them. So a couple things I think are really interesting. One is called Maven. The CEO is Kate Ryder. They've had 110 million in funding and have had a number of celebrity endorsements: Oprah, Reese Witherspoon, Natalie Portman. And it's a virtual clinic for women, family health, fertility, pregnancy, parenting. So they've expanded beyond just sort of fertility tracking or periods. And they seem to be getting a lot of good press, and it seems pretty solid.
Yeah. I concur. Maven Clinic, great company.
Anna Lindau has founded Brave Health. And they're a behavioral health company, really trying to bridge the gap and eliminate disparities, and they're getting a fair amount of press and investment. Carolyn Witt has founded Tia. And so that actually is really interesting. Also a lifespan company for women from puberty to menopause. And then I want to give a shout out to Emily McGinn, who's founded EXO, which is a femme-focused company that's looking at health areas of health disparities in female health and focusing on real solutions. That's really exciting. And so she's a local person here working in that space. So I just wanted to
I love that. We're
Shout
gonna
out
call
to-
on you. We want to
Shout out to
hear from you.
Emily about that.
We will be going into questions in the next 5 minutes, so start to think about your questions, or comments or whatever. I love that list. It's a great list. And it's really interesting to see how digital health is targeting all different aspects of women's health. So there's a company called Poly, which is for PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's a company called BGABI, B-E, and then Gabi, G-A-B-B-I. They're creating an AI-driven 3-year breast cancer risk assessment tool. And how would you get revenue from a little quiz that women take once a year? You sell it to their employers, because what's really expensive? Employers paying for healthcare of women with breast cancer. And so they much rather pay $50 a year for every female employee to have this app on their phone for them to take their test and then, go find out if they have breast cancer. So there's really innovative business models and ways to think about, what is status quo, like mammogram, an annual, like squeeze your breasts in a radiology machine, by the way. Yeah, I'm like always confused about cancer treatment. I'm like, so we're inducing cancer? That's what we're doing. We're giving you chemo regardless. There's different ways to question, how are we currently doing things and could it be better? Are we accepting that this is good enough, right? Because oftentimes good enough is what is the bar for women, and then often for men's health, it's unacceptable. It needs to be top line. Speaking of the FDA and how they are, they have a hand in women's health, is the Viagra drug. Do y'all remember what the initial thing was for Viagra? What was it?
High blood pressure.
High blood pressure. And what was the symptom that they noticed? Erections, right?
Yeah.
What else did they notice? Did you know that there was another thing they really noticed? In fact, even more so than erections? It decreased menstrual pain for women. And that was initially what people went to, the scientists, they went to FDA and they said, oh my God, women don't have cramps anymore, because that's to do with blood flow, right? Women don't have cramps anymore. This is like the absolute gold standard of Midol. And the FDA said, doesn't have that big of an impact.
Right.
And then they said, well, they also cause erections, and the FDA was like, do it, give everyone hormones, right? And we didn't even know, y'all didn't even know that was actually the first thing that they noticed, was that women didn't have menstrual cramps anymore. That is how these kind of stakeholders actually influence women's health. Women, it was actually illegal for women to be included, and by women, I mean females, in clinical trials between 1973 and 1993. A drug was never tested on a woman in those 2 decades, because they saw preserving a woman's fertility and her potential unborn child as more important than, but if you think about it, women are eventually going to take it, right? And so the clinical trial happens, but in public, without regulation, without monitoring. Women have 5 times more symptoms from therapeutic drugs than men today. We also give the same dosages to both sexes. And so there is a story about Ambien, if anyone knows that. Women metabolize Ambien way slower than men do because of our enzymes that we have. And so there was over 20 years of car accidents, of women getting in car accidents on their way to work in the morning because they were so high on Ambien. They were still half asleep. And it took 20 years for finally the FDA to be like, oopsies, women only need 1/3 of the dose. And that's the only drug to date that's modulated differently based on your sex. Why do we have clinical trials with vaccines specifically for children? It's because of dosage, because they're smaller. If that is the case, why do they assume adult females are the same size as adult men? And women have way more adverse side effects to vaccines than men do. Regardless of the fact that most of our immune system genes are on an X chromosome, which, by the way, do you love my dress? I love it.
I do.
I was looking at it.
We have more autoimmune disease on our X chromosomes. We have more intense autoimmune responses. So in fact, not only are we smaller than the typical Caucasian male, we are also have more robust immune system. So we probably only need 1/3 of the vaccine, right? These are all things that once you start to look under the hood, you're like, ooh, we're living in a world on men's healthcare, and women are suffering the consequences accordingly. So LabCorp recently acquired Ovia. Can you tell us what does Ovia do? What catalyzed that decision? An acquisition is, a big purchase, right? It's a big move. It's, you know, there's a lot of PR around it. The femtech industry, we were excited. So tell us what catalyzed that whole thing.
Yeah, well, we were excited too, on the LabCorp side. And actually, we were an early investor in Ovia Health. And it's through our LabCorp venture fund. We had this partnership. We were helping them to think through what their offering would be. And now Ovia has 3 different apps. There's a fertility app, a pregnancy app, and a parenting app. And so what we liked about Ovia, also kind of 3 main things. The first was access to consumer engagement specialists. So LabCorp, like, we know how to run the tests, we know the science, we've got that, but we're still building this consumer engagement strategy and model. And Ovia has helped 15 million families, and the average user opens the app 25 times a month. So they know how to engage patients. So women's health with Ovia is kind of the first engagement model that we're learning from and building, but we want to expand that to diabetes care, to heart disease, to other areas, and really make it a core capability at LabCorp. Second thing is, it was very strategic that the first area we're investing in is women's health. As I mentioned before, women make 80% of healthcare decisions, and the most engaged time in a woman's healthcare journey is during pregnancy. So we want, LabCorp is already involved in 25% of pregnancies in the US. A lot of times we're in the back end. We're doing non-invasive prenatal testing. We're doing all of the testing, but it might just come through a woman's physician. And so she might not know who LabCorp is. So this is our way to get more engaged and get a little bit closer to that decision maker who's so critical. And then the last thing we loved about Ovia is just the fit with their mission and our mission. Everything LabCorp does is to improve health and improve lives. And Ovia is not just like a content platform that tells you your baby's the size of a grapefruit. Instead, they're using that data for good. Ovia has reduced the number of C-sections by 10%. So not only is that great for baby, great for mom, also great for the healthcare system in general. It costs less to not have a C-section. And so we're learning all of these ways that we can improve healthcare. So it's something we're so excited about, and the first of hopefully a lot of more.
I love it. Well, a few more questions before we open it up. Both of you, what if we had somebody here who wants to start a startup, what's an area in women's health and wellness that you think still needs innovating? And the answer I know is everything, but what is your number one choice? Whoever wants to go first.
That's a good one.
I think that we know that for women, because women are so busy, I think we need to have more of this lifespan approach. And I think one area, there's a lot around pregnancy, and we certainly could do more given what you talked about with mortality. I'm a big fan of midlife women's health right now. Now that may be because I'm midlife, but the menopause transition, which corresponds with increased risk of osteoporosis, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of breast cancer, just to get started, mental health concerns, diabetes, aging related things. That group is like out of their mind crazy with the sandwich generation of taking care of their own kids, taking care of elderly parents, and trying to juggle everything. And they historically, in that age group, they don't make time for themselves. They make time for everyone else, and that's falling through the cracks. And then trying to go to 65 different visits. So I think a one-stop shopping midlife women's health center / integrated digital health solution could be brilliant.
Love it.
Great. And I'll piggyback on that a little bit, but I think it's about integrating the entire family data into one spot so that a woman doesn't have to spend tons of time logging into different EMRs, trying to get her parents' data and her children's data, and then make sense of it all when what's normal for a woman in her 30s is different than a young child is different than a geriatric patient. So being able to have all of that information in one spot, I think women are going to stay the healthcare decision makers for a while. Now, would like to see more men help in that area, but making it easier is a big unmet need.
And to put it in context, what does that statistic mean? 80% of healthcare decisions? It means that if there's 100 decisions for healthcare, whether it's your dentist, your eye doctor, your annual, your pap smear, your whatever, it's usually the woman in the household making that decisions for her children and her partner, scheduling their appointments, reminding them to take it. So that's what we're meaning by this. They're literally the CEO of healthcare in their home, and yet they are the underserved individual. I would add, I love diagnostics. We need more diagnostics. If we cannot diagnose something, we are literally depending on physicians to believe women when they complain of pain. First of all, society tells women to not complain of pain. So the fact that they even end up going to the physician saying, I just don't feel right, I don't understand what it is, it means it's really bad already. And then second of all, you need the physician to believe her. And there's actually something called medical gaslighting that's very, very pervasive in women's health, where the physician says, you just need to drink some more wine, like you don't have sexual dysfunction, like you're just stressed, take a vacation, then you'll have more sex with your husband. Meanwhile, she may have an actual, it's essentially like our version of erectile dysfunction, right? But we're told like, oh, drink alcohol. That's a terrible suggestion for a physician to tell you, but that's what we're up against here. So I'm more diagnostic. So you can say, hey, I don't feel well here. And they say, well, okay, here's a test for X, Y, and Z that the symptoms are potentially. We still do not have a functional diagnostic for endometriosis. It takes on average 7 years to be diagnosed in 4 physicians, because the women are not believed. There is actually a very, very high statistically significant number of young puberty, women and girls in puberty that are going to the hospital because they have such intense emotional swings, and they're being sent to the psych ward. And the psych ward says, this woman has PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. She has a hormone issue. It's not psychosis, it's that her hormones, but we have such a misconceived notion of these things and a lack of diagnostics to really test it.
And I love that because diagnostics are only 3% of healthcare spend in
Really?
the US. 3%,
Wow.
but involved in 70% of the decisions. So if you want to talk about lowering healthcare costs, 7 years and multiple specialists, or one affordable test. So how can we develop that test? How can we get employers and insurance companies to cover it, and then it improves obviously the patient experience.
And if you're here, you probably like healthcare, but maybe you're more into economics and the government. Well, the economic burden of women missing work every year is astronomical. Like if you literally just want to save our country money, invest in women's health diagnostics to get us help, right? And then the last question, we'll open it up. But what if we've inspired everyone in the room? They want to get into women's health. Who works in women's health? Is it just women? Is it just physicians? I'm giving it away. It's not. But what would you say for the audience? How do they get more involved? What skill sets do they need in order to work in women's health?
Well, I think we need all skill sets. Now, if you go to any conference on women's health, about 90% or more people there are women, which I think explains why you are seeing so much more investment in women's health and forward progress in women's health, because there are women physicians and scientists and entrepreneurs promoting it. I'm married to an OBGYN who is a man. So it's not that I don't think men can't be great advocates or allies for women's health, and we need them too. But I do think that it had been horribly neglected for so long. And there is a sea change with just the sheer numbers of women in STEM and medicine and business, et cetera. But I think ideally, I think it needs to be something that we see as important to all of us. So I would like to go to a conference focused on women's health and not have it be only, 95% women there. I would like it to be men seeing it as equally important, because men have women in their lives. So I think that moving beyond where we've been to see it as it's all of us, and it's really important that we take care of 50% of the population rather than just neglecting it, would be a nice thing.
I love that because women's health is everyone's health. That's how I end every podcast episode. I say, Wolfham fans, keep innovating because women's health is everyone's health. And I mean that very, very real. And recently I discovered something that I was like, oh my God, this even proves my point even more. When there's a disease that is culturally seen as a woman's disease, it's wildly underserved and underfunded. But 30% of osteoporosis patients are men. And they have like no solutions. And the men are like, I Googled osteoporosis and all it says is that it's women's disease and like there's nothing for me. And we're like, welcome. I know it's terrible. They're like, or anorexia. 40% of anorexics are male. And yet I never hear about that. What are the solutions for those men? It's perceived to be a woman's issue. And so it's underserved, underfunded. What would you say in terms of how the audience should get involved in women's health?
So I think all you need to be involved in women's health is compassion and empathy. There's no special skill set. You don't need to be a physician or a business person, just caring and being a decent human. You're here today because you're involved and because you're interested. So just be an advocate and be persistent because changes like these take time. They take years and years and years. So keep coming to things like this, keep being involved and keep using your voice.
Yeah. The men involved, we have a book club, monthly book club we meet. We have lots of events. 2 weeks ago, we had a jobs fair. And I find that the men that come are honestly very curious. They're curious and they're humble in terms of, hey, I may not understand that and I'm excited to learn. And that just like the industry, we just love them because we need men in this. So I would love to open it up. This is such a great conversation. I hope that's all.
Yes, sure. So I love Dr. Samantha Melson-Brody and I'm so grateful for her. And she mentioned my company. And sorry, I was cheering for Carolina a lot this weekend, so please excuse my very raspy voice. But so what we do is we bridge the gap between disparities in women's health research to develop female-focused health solutions that fit women's physiology. And so we've talked about the huge disparities in women's healthcare research and treatment and how that leads to solutions that are often misguided, ineffective, and even dangerous. So one of the problems is funding, right? Like 4% of R&D funding goes towards solutions for women's health, while 2% goes to a man's prostate alone. Real fun to give a speech to a room full of men and tell them that. And also when you look at research, which you're saying, diagnostic tools, and we really have to, have good research to develop good solutions. When you look at chronic pain, 80% of pain research is done on men, but 70% of people who experience chronic pain are women. And when you talk about clinical trials, the average participant in a clinical trial is a white male who is 5'9" and weighs 199.8 pounds. I am 5'1" and I weigh 98 pounds. So any solution that I take is developed dosed and tested on someone twice my size, and that's not taking into account any anatomical and physiological differences. So it's a huge problem, right? And so how do we start addressing that? It impacts physical interventions, but there's also real ramifications to digital interventions out there that have no efficacy to them. And so we're starting with digital interventions, and we develop holistic solutions to help women. We're starting with a postpartum rehabilitation app. We will develop solutions that care for their physical health and mental well-being. When talking about mental health apps, 2/3 of them actually had no physician or medical professional involved in development. So you need to do your diligence, right? And so what we're doing is we have assembled the best team of experts to help us not only develop tools and resources that are going to help women, but also we have a data side of the app. So to your point of how do we identify things and how do we make sure that women are not gaslit, And so with our postpartum rehabilitation app, there's a daily log and journal. And what you can do is you, on the physical health side, have an image of the body and you can highlight where your pain is. And then there's keywords, because sometimes, especially postpartum, what is this pain? How do I put words to it? And you can select those keywords and then you can rank it on a scale and then put it in your own words. And on the mental health side, we have a modified Edinburgh postnatal depression scale. And so helping women identify and start to see a pattern, but also filling a gap. There's a lot of visits during pregnancy. There's not a lot during postpartum.
There's one,
There's
6
one.
weeks after childbirth, and it's usually to see if your stitches in your vagina that ripped are successfully disintegrated.
So we can't fix the whole healthcare system, you know, overnight, but what we can do is we can equip women. And we can figure out, you know, on a business model side, how do we get these tools and resources into the hands of women? Because if you are going to be diagnosed with perinatal depression, according to the DSM-5, you actually have to be diagnosed within those first 4 weeks postpartum, and you're not seeing anyone who is caring for you. Now, you are going to a pediatrician, and they may or may not have you fill out that Edinburgh Depression Scale, but most likely what they're going to do when you walk in the room is ask you if your baby's latching, you know, and so they're not really looking at you. So with our app, what these women are able to do that helps combat the gaslighting, helps, you know, get them the care that they may need, if so they can hopefully get treatment, because they also, you know, they have to have the resources to go into a doctor's visit and have childcare and all those things. So they're already going to see a pediatrician, they can pull up our app and they can show them, right? Like, here is the days that these things happened, right? And here's the real data. And so we can start to at least close that gap. And then lastly, you know, where do we go from here? We're not a one-off app, right? So we're leveraging that data to develop future interventions and treatments. And why we chose postpartum is because pregnancy is not a health neutral event. It's actually an on-off switch for a lot of other women's health issues, for example, autoimmune disease, et cetera. So lifespan, following someone through the lifespan, you talk about LTV CAC. We're following these women because we're creating real solutions that help improve patient outcomes. And then they're going to continue to share their data. We'll continue to build other digital and then physical interventions that will serve them through their lifetime. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's audacious, but there really is a structure and that will scientifically and formulaically scale off of, but it is a challenge. It's kind of the last thing is now there is a lot of attention and there are a lot of things out there. So how do you determine, you know, efficacy and do people care? Last thing I'll say is Noom has raised over $600 million in venture funding. It says it's science-based, but it's not. And then there was that investigative report that came out last month. And so there are all these tweets. And one woman said that she was postpartum exclusively breastfeeding, and it told her to consume 1,200 calories. Yeah. And according to the NIH, you should consume, if you're an active woman, 2,400 calories. So people say, you know, does this app, even if it's just giving them tools and resources, like some, you know, and a few other things that Ovia does, but are there real ramifications to an app? Like, is it going to cause harm? Absolutely. They're getting twice, they should be getting twice the amount of calories to care for their body. So anyway, that I could talk about it all day, but that's what we do. And you know, we've assembled the best team, and I'm so grateful for Dr. Samantha Mills-Brody, and happy to talk to anyone later if you're interested about, you know, not being a doctor and how you can help women.
Literally trying to just smile because I have so many comments. Anybody else? Have you been shocked today? Have you been shocked? You've been shocked? You've been shocked?
I have.
Oh, hello. Oh, hands, Curtis.
How you doing? I just want to say thank you all for coming today, because I've never really focused on this part of the industry, and you know, it's really been extremely helpful for me. Opened my eyes to a lot, really changed my mindset on a lot of things. You know, I guess my worry is that as you know, as anything with business, as private equity firms and things like that move into the industry, it's starting to become more profit over people. And, you know, and that's the thing I'm worried about in the industry. But, you know, just as a person that was completely ignorant to the women's health, you know, what's the first thing you think? I understand you said compassion and things like that, but like, what's the first thing maybe I should read, maybe I should go to really just, you know, just kickstart this whole process of trying to learn?
You can listen to the podcast, Femtech Focus. You can subscribe to our newsletter, join our virtual community. We have monthly book club. We actually have a lot of men that attend our virtual book club because they're like literally learning about women's health issues. You don't have to read the book necessarily to come. We do a great job of summarizing it. I would say that also asking the women in your life, you know, hey, have you ever had a doctor not believe you when you went in? Like, hey, have you ever had a issue of finding the right birth control? I almost promise you every woman you meet will say, yeah, I've tried several. You 1 in 4 women have had an abortion. I'm not asking you to go around and ask that, but I'm saying that there's a lot of women that have had medical issues or struggles that they have never been asked about or provided a safe space to talk about. So even talking to your men friends about periods, because we are literally as founders educating investors. We're giving a sex ed talk for half of our pitch. And then we're going into our business model because we're literally educating them about it. And so if more men can just start to educate each other about women don't use 1 tampon for the whole week, we can start to bypass some of these basic sad things. Oh, yeah, believe me, I've heard, yes. So we can bypass these things. I'm so glad, Curtis, if you're interested, please get involved, reach out to me. I'm actually organizing a Femtech Summit, June 1st and 2nd. It is going to be in person here. I am looking for some interns to help me with the organization. So it's a great opportunity to get involved that way. Jillian.
Yes, hi, how are you? I'm a UNC med grad from 2017. So I am so excited for this talk, and I wanted to speak on, I'll put my hand down here for a second, on the eating disorder topic. And I would love to just put my name as somebody that can speak on behalf of living with anorexia for most of my life. I was actually treated at UNC right after my medical school graduation, or right before my medical school graduation. And throughout my life, I've realized there's such a paucity of research on it, and a lot of it seems to be due to the research funding. And then that leaves us with a lot of the misconceptions about what eating disorders are and what they look like, quote unquote, what they should look like. So I have been writing on Kevin MD, both on eating disorders, on burnout and depression that I experienced in medical school, that actually Dr. Meltzer-Brody really helped me through to make some good life decisions on helping me through that. And also about the weight biases and what was mentioned with the low calories and how oppressive diet culture can be. And as was just mentioned, and how it's often using our insecurities and vulnerabilities for the profit of others. So I have such a deep passion to help bring self-compassion back to people, because that was such a healing aspect for my own eating disorder. And it breaks my heart to see people still beating themselves up and often being given this advice within our own medical system, because that's what we're being taught. And once we learn to do better, we do better. And that's kind of what I like. Let's forgive ourselves for thinking we were doing the best for our patients, and now do better now that we know better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful.
Yep. I just interviewed the founder of Equip Health, which is pretty much the first digital health platform for virtual care for eating disorders. And so that episode will come out in the next few weeks. But they said when they were pitching to VCs, they said, we've heard like 20 mental health apps get pitched today, but you're the only one focusing on eating disorders. And so it really is like it's a gold rush, y'all. Like there's so many things that there's no solutions for. And I think they just closed another 10 million in funding. So luckily they are email founded and getting traction in something that's predominantly women, but it's everybody actually. Yeah. Are there more questions online? How about here? Any comments, questions? Yes.
So you were saying with when you develop new technology, mostly white females are the ones who can afford it. Are you doing any kind of initiative to help? I mean, I know ideal would be the insurance, make sure that, but from your side, are you doing something to make sure that it does get to minority?
How about we ask LabCorp and institutional, and then I'll give you my view on startups and how they're doing it.
Yeah, so we look at every pathway to bring something to a patient, whether it's through the employer model, whether it's through universities, whether it's through charitable programs. So it's still a gap. We haven't figured it out, quite frankly. But we no longer just think, okay, here's United, they're going to pay this much, the end. We're starting to think about what are these other channels and how do we get to those underserved communities. So I'm optimistic that we'll make progress in the future, but it's still very much an issue.
I mean, I work for a public institution because I believe in taking care of all of society, because I believe healthcare is a right. And so I trained at a private place up the road, which will go unnamed, and I realized halfway through my residency that I needed to be at a public institution, where I've spent the last 22 years. At UNC, I have the privilege to take care of people who are uninsured, who have public insurance through Medicaid and private insurance. And we still do a terrible job in this country of ensuring access to care for everything. If you are affluent, you will be able to buy yourself into whatever you need. And I'll just give an example of my field, psychiatry, which has really been abysmal. The payers have been a disaster because they discriminate against mental health care and underpay and reject as much as possible, which is egregious. And despite there being mental health parity laws, in my mind, the payers need to be taken to the mat. Now, they're a really powerful lobbying group, but we need to all band together and move that, particularly in the mental health domain. But what has happened professionally is that a lot of mental health professionals either move to fee for service, just, like cosmetic industry, and you pay out of pocket, which is what rich people can do, or you have the public sector for people who are indigent, and then you're like screwed in the middle, which of course is most of the people walking around. So the mental health apps, whatever, like Talkspace, Michael Phelps is sponsoring, those things are okay, great. You can have your on-demand therapist of whatever dubious quality they may be, but then you have to pay a monthly fee that is prohibitive for a lot of people. So I think, in my mind, and I think about this a lot, given the population I care for, a lot of technology is focused on rich white people, and a lot of health innovation is focused on rich white people. And it takes a long time for that to disseminate. Yeah. And I don't have any easy solutions on what to do about that. But I think we have to see it as all of our business, because a society is only as successful as its most vulnerable. And in this country, we have a major problem with that. And until we decide we want to tackle that squarely, you continue to see increasing disparities, which then leads to some percentage thriving and the rest not. And then that just causes, any number of problems.
Yeah, and I think all of you in this room are future leaders, and a lot of these choices come down to leadership. At LabCorp, when we launched our COVID test, we said we will not charge a penny upfront to get access to this test. We will not prioritize any patient above anyone else. We had like celebrities and athletes calling us to say, hey, can you put me at the front of the line? No, we don't do that. And 3, we were going to expand capacity as fast as possible. Those 3 principles were put in place by our CEO, and people throughout the company questioned them. So when you're in a leadership position, stick to your principles and ensure access to care.
Yeah. Please add me on LinkedIn. I am called aggressive more times. I'd be an accredited investor if I had a nickel for every time I was called aggressive, but it's just because I call things out and I'm assertive. And I'm going to continue to maintain that quality. In terms of startups and venture, at one point I thought, why would founders only target these rich people? Why are they doing this, right? And then I'm in the center of the beast, and I realized that founders are so desperate to get funding, they'll do anything to get funding. And once you're funded, your soul is sold to them, to the venture capitalists. Okay, I'm one of them. I'm trying to change it, but alas, venture capitalists, it's not even their money; it's their LP money, limited partner money. So it's private equity, Walton family, etc. Right? They want their money back in 10 years. If you are distributing your investments over you're fundraising for a year and a half. You're deploying for 2 years, and then you're trying to harvest for the remaining 6, those companies better get really close to a $300 million exit. How do you get close to a $300 million exit? You have revenue. How do you get revenue? Somebody paying for it. If there's no billing codes, then fuck, we're not gonna go that way. Medicaid, are you kidding me? Like that takes forever to get Congress to vote on what Medicaid covers. 50% of childbirths in the United States are covered by Medicaid, 50%. If you are a maternal health app and you do not have a Medicaid objective, you're missing half the market. But unfortunately, the other half is the ones that have, Blue Cross Blue Shield or out of pocket, and they actually pay. And these founders are held accountable by their investors to meet their milestones, to meet the revenue. And then I realized, oh my God, the issue is the people even further behind the curtain that I didn't even realize existed that are actually the puppet masters. They're the pimp hand, essentially, the power, influence, money, and politics that are essentially making all of these things be what they are. My favorite, two of my favorite companies that are working really hard on addressing this, like disparity and how do you target these communities. One, her name is Kimberly Seal Ayers. She's amazing. And she created this app called Earth, but it's spelled birth without the B. So it's IRTH, Earth. And it's birth without the bias. And it's literally a Yelp app for women to review their physicians, specifically on their microaggressions, their gaslighting, their treatment, or any racial comments that were made, and so that we as women can then hold them accountable and know which ones to go to. But she's a big believer in the LPs, venture capitalists. They're not the ones who are going to innovate a solution for the women in the Bronx, like for women in, you know, rural Kentucky. Like, what do they know about what they need, right? It needs to be grassroots driven within that community. They don't need affluent white people going in there being like, here's your solution, everybody. You know, like, that's just going to fall on its face. It needs to be grassroots internally into that community. And then the other app that I really like is Health in Her Hue, HUE. They are, it's essentially like ZocDoc, but only for Black physicians, because statistically it shows that Black patients seeing Black physicians have decreased rates of incidents and stuff. So sometimes it's just about helping people find the right care in that way. I'm not sure how much time we have. I literally talk about this all day. I'm a podcaster.
Yeah.
That's all I do.
Food is here, but let's like give another round of applause. Much for those who attended, and thank you for your time. We don't have plates for the pizza, but you're welcome to take as many slices as you want. It is a smaller group, so yeah. Thank you, everyone.
I have business cards here if you'd like to pass them around, and we have a QR code. I think you have all my stuff, but as a QR code for the podcast, if you want to quickly be able to find it.